Okay, go to Genesis chapter 2, first place that we'll go, and we're continuing our series on rearing children. And so tonight I want to just deal with something that is pretty obviously, we all should probably know this, and it should make common sense. It shouldn't be really hard to convince anybody of this or whatever, but we're going to look at this because I think it's practical. It's very important. I think that all of us who are raising children should be mindful of this and be thinking about this. Hopefully you already are. I think that everybody in here would be mindful of this, but we want to take a look at this. This isn't actually a question that it's not a question that came into me, but it's just something that I just think that we all ought to consider this. All right. In the message, the sermon title is Partnership in Raising Children. So specifically the husband and the wife working together and being a team in raising children. I think this is very important. I'm sure I could get a lot more detailed than I'm going to tonight, but we'll see what happens. But first of all, I want you to remember this: the person with whom you had these children, okay, if you've done everything right, the way that it should be anyway, the person with whom you had these children is still going to be there when the children are gone. This is an important thing to remember. I remember being excited when Valerie and I were getting close to that time where we would have been married longer than we weren't married. Okay, so now I've been with Valerie longer than the time that I spent at home, and that was kind of an exciting thought. Right, and now the next milestone, I guess, would be living twice as long, as a couple than we were at home. And then I have a daughter who gets married, and thinking about my children who get married. Now all of a sudden, it's kind of a sad thought, isn't it? It's like theoretically, like if they live a long life, our children are only with us as we're raising them for a relatively small portion of their life. And then they go out and the rest of their life. Now I realize you're still involved in their life. You're still there. You know them. They know you. But not to the same extent that their spouses will, and that they, and a lot of it, unfortunately, will be forgotten. And you know that having children, even if you only have one child, and that child is only 2 years old, how many memories you've already forgotten. You start freaking out a little bit, like, oh no, I'm going to start forgetting all these memories. I'm going to start forgetting what this was like and forgetting all the little things that our kids did. It's just the reality of growing up and having children, raising children, and then sending them off on their own. Okay, so go to Genesis 2. This is by design. This is the way it's supposed to be. Genesis 2, verse 24 says, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed." Okay, so this is the start of the human race. The first two humans, and man, male and female created he them. They became one flesh. And from that point forward, the Bible says that's the way that it's supposed to be. In fact, Jesus quotes this same thing. You can read about it in Matthew, you can read about it in Mark. And he says, as it's written, let a man leave mother and father and cling to his wife. They two shall be one flesh. Paul quotes it in Ephesians 5. So this was just, anytime you are talking about marriage, husband and wife coming together, it's like, oh, don't you remember back in Genesis when he created mankind? This was the concept. A man's going to leave his mother and father, and he's going to cleave to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Whereas our relationship with children is we're going to send them off, right? They're arrows in the hand of a mighty man, blessed is he whose quiver is full of them. And it's like we're sending them off like arrows. Completely different than just cleaving to your wife or cleaving to your spouse. With our children, obviously there's a cleaving there, in the beginning stages and the raising and all that stuff. But the Bible just talks about them like, hey, it's our job to raise them, to send them off, and then they can make their own families and they can cleave to their spouse, okay? And obviously there's exceptions to that, but that is the idea. That's the way it was created, right? Be fruitful, multiply, and this was the idea. In fact, I'm somewhat surprised in the Bible when I read it. Like a lot of our thoughts about raising children, quite honestly, are relatively new ideas and thoughts. Okay, the Bible doesn't actually address that much. the philosophies behind raising children, and what a child needs, and all these kinds of things, the psychology and all this. Like, this is relatively new. Like, maybe you go back to the 50s. I mean, that's when some of this first started, the idea that we have towards children now. And if you look back, you'll say, like, oh, they were so rude, mean to kids way back in the day, and there was child labor, and there was, hey, children are supposed to be seen and not heard, and all these kinds of attitudes they had towards children. And now we look and say how wicked they were. Based on what? I mean, I'm not condoning that. I'm just saying, like, based on what? What says that we have to treat children a certain way? I mean, you can go back to the Bible and say, if you beat them, they shall not die, right? And it's just like, it almost sounds like, man, people had a terrible relationship with their children. No, the Bible actually tells us a lot about loving our children, and obviously it talks about what parent that has a child, would treat them such. And if they ask for a bread, you're not going to give them a stone. Like, obviously we care for our children, that's naturally, but the Bible doesn't give a whole lot in regards to how to it does talk about, for instance, I often bring up how it says not to provoke them to wrath, and so there's a little bit of instructions towards raising children, but there's a whole lot more, I think, towards your spouse and loving your spouse and all that. So we have to understand that when it comes to raising a family, that family starts with the husband and the wife. Now, I know we live in a weird society now where that's not the case. And there are people who will come together, no intent to be married, but they're like, you know what, I think I want to have a child. And they'll have children with no intention of being married, or maybe, God forbid, Lord help us, but there will be, same-sex marriages, or maybe even not marriages, and they'll say, like, oh, we want to have children too. And so they'll just totally throw any biblical concept of marriage out the window, and they'll just say, oh, we just want to raise children, like it's not, part of husband and wife coming together. But we all know that's the way God designed it. That's the way that makes sense. And that a male and a female come together, they have children. And so it starts with the husband and the wife. And our relationship there is going to be quite a bit different, where we're clinging to, so again, if we're clinging together, we're becoming one flesh, we raise children, we send them out. What's it look like after we send our children out? We're back, I hate to use this word, but we're back stuck together again. You know what I mean? It's just you and me now. I'm slowly starting to visualize that. Now that we have Viviana, it's delayed a little bit, but but I'm slowly coming to the point where I can visualize what it's going to be like to be what they call empty nesters, right? And so now it's just, and the problem is you have to ask yourself at some point, because you spend so much of your life raising children, then it's like, wait, can we go back to the way that it was before we had children? So many people don't. So many people don't know what to do with themselves after the children leave the house. And so they'll just decide to get into another relationship, or they'll just kind of give up on their marriage. And it's unfortunate the amount of casualties our society has in this way. But look, going into marriage, going into starting a family, going into raising this family, obviously there are some principles that as Christians we need to say, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. And one of those things is obviously thinking about the fact that your spouse is your teammate, okay, your partner. So we're talking about partnership in raising children. When it comes to the husband-wife relationship as it relates to raising children, there are some things that we want to consider, okay? So throughout this process of raising children, number one, here's first and foremost, you need to be on the same page with your spouse, okay? You need to be on the same page. We're a unit. We're one flesh. And so raising these children, we're going to have the same mindset, okay? Unfortunately, again, a lot of families don't have that. But as Christians, we know that this is going to be the case. And of course, there are some general biblical principles that we can understand. Like you say, well, how do we know? Where are we going to go forward? You get married, you decide you want to have children, and you say, okay, where are we going to go forward? Like, how do we be on the same page? I remember early on, Valerie and I talking about this before we got married, and understanding that, the way she was raised was a little different than how I was raised. And so all of a sudden she started getting kind of scared, like, oh no, we're going to have children, and I would like to see them raised this way, and you might want to see them raised this way. Are we going to butt heads? And it's just like, well, don't know, are we? Never really thought about that. And so you start thinking this through. What's it going to look like? How do we know where to draw these lines, and how are we going to be on the same page? Well, first and foremost, if you love the Lord, the Bible should be your final authority, right? And so we should have some things automatically, if we both agree in the Bible, that we should be able to say, okay, the Bible says that this is how our children need to be raised, and so you need to be on the same page in these regards. First of all, God must be the central focus of your house. Okay, that should be number one. How you work together, it should be understood. God's going to be first. Joshua 24:15, you're familiar with. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That should be the motto that we have. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Look at Psalm 127. I already made reference to this with the arrows in the hand of a mighty man. Let me read this whole chapter. It's not very long. Psalm 127. And I love this. It starts, this first verse just kind of sets in, like, here it is. You want to start a family? Know this. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. As Christians, anything we do, anything we're starting, has to be founded on God being first. Let God do it His way. We're going to go according to His principles, because if He doesn't build the house, our labor's in vain. It's not going to stay together. Okay, so first and foremost, we need to keep God at the forefront. Let's go ahead and read the rest of the chapter. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for so He giveth His beloved sleep. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is His reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. Okay, so this is a great blessing to have children, but I love how it starts off by saying, but if you're trying to build your house, you're laboring in vain. You need to let the Lord build it. You need to do it His way. So first and foremost, that's got to be our central focus as Christians raising a family. As for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. We're going to do it the Bible way. We're going to do it God's way. Make God happy. That, by the way, if that's your first, all the rest of this is just going to fall right into place. If you're already saying, we want to put God first, we want to do it His way, see what the Bible has to say, you're already miles and miles and miles ahead of the average family in the United States when it comes to raising children. Okay, so you already got the biggest part of the success established if you're putting God first. All right, now, having said that, what follows that? And as far as authority in the house, is the husband or the father needs to be in charge. Okay, this is established all throughout the Bible. I know it's not always easy, and sometimes maybe even might seem counterintuitive in that, like, you might say, like, well, actually, the wife, whatever the case is, whoever we're talking about, the wife seems to understand things, like know how to run things and have more concern in some ways that the family goes this direction or that direction. And it might just be natural intuition to say, like, well, then let her lead then. You let her decide. Like, if mama's not happy, nobody's happy, and so we'll just let mama decide what's going to make everybody happy, right? This is a common thing, even among Christians and all of us, because naturally guys are just like, I don't care. Like, I just want to go do my thing, So naturally, it is just normal for us to just kind of leave a lot of the decision making to the wives, and that's honestly what has brought our country to where it is now. In many ways, it was that mentality, and then it was just like men leaving the home and letting the women raise their spouse, their children, and then just the spouses just kind of separate or whatever. So we got to the point where we are today, which is all kinds of splinters off of that mentality. Okay, so we know that the Bible, though, teaches from the very beginning. So go back to Genesis again. We already read Genesis 2. Look at Genesis chapter 3. This is after the fall of man. God's handing out punishments, if you will, consequences to their actions. Genesis 3:16. Here's what God says to the woman. Unto the woman He said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over them. Right now, you're like, man, this is a punishment? Like, is it that bad to let the husband lead? I don't know that you can necessarily think of it like God's just punishing the woman, right? Because, Eve was the one who did this. It's just the consequence of that is like, okay, here's how the fallen nature is going to work. When we're living in this cursed earth and we're kind of going about, God's not walking in the midst of the garden and he's not directing us like he was. Now we're paying for our consequences in this fallen earth. So here are some principles. God says men are going to work by the sweat of their brow, and there's going to be a curse upon the land and all that. And actually that work is good for us. Okay, that's what we're supposed to be doing. It keeps us out of trouble if we just work hard and keep focused on the work that we're supposed to do, provide for our family and all that kind of stuff. But then it also says that the woman, she's going to have that pain of bearing the child. And then also she's going to be the weaker vessel, the Bible talks about. And so therefore her desire is going to be unto her husband. Her husband's going to rule over her. Now, obviously, since the world began, it seems like there have been women who have tried to fight against that model and say, well, that's just not right. That's just not fair. We want equal rights. We want all this kind of stuff. But the reality is, it is still, and I know it's not popular, it is still a man's world. Just because there are men in leadership who are just like, oh no, we want equal rights for women and we're feminist and all this kind of stuff. It's like, hey, don't let them fool you. If it came down to every man, for himself, survival of the fittest, the men are going to take charge. The men are going to run the country. They're going to overpower the women. Okay, so don't be fooled by those who pretend like, no, we would never do that. We want equal rights. Okay, look how sports is even starting to act like that's a thing, and it's just like, no, it's not working. The men are designed in such a way that they're going to be able to excel in many areas. Now, but that doesn't make the woman less valuable, because the man could not survive, couldn't live without the woman, and there's certain things that she's good at that he needs. So again, we're designed to work as a team, the husband and the wife, but God said, here's how the team's going to work. The husband's going to be the one in charge. I mean, authority is just kind of crazy like that. And man naturally rebels against authority, don't we? I mean, it's just like, as soon as you start working somewhere, you learn right away, no one likes the boss. It's just like, oh yeah, he doesn't do this, and he doesn't understand that, and he doesn't give me days off that I need, and all this kind of stuff. It's just like, nobody likes the boss. And think about this, if I were to leave, I don't know, I don't want to use this. Okay, I already started, so I'm going to leave. Let's go back a little ways, okay? And we're going to leave the house, and so I left my children. We'll go way back to whenever Sharice was still in our house, okay? And it's like, we're going to leave our children alone. We're going to say, all right, Zachary's in charge because he's the oldest. How many of you think that the other two children were just like, all right, Zachary, what are we going to do next? No, they're rebelling against authority. Why does he get to be the boss? Like, I can do this better than him, and he doesn't do this right, and I don't. And this would be the mindset, because that's just naturally how it goes. All right. So I can tell you this: since the beginning of creation, well, man's going to be the one in charge. Well, obviously, there's always been those who fight against that. But in your household, when it comes to raising your children, it needs to be established. Well, more than just raising your children, that's what we're talking about here. It needs to be established that the man is ultimately the one in charge. Now, he's going to delegate, and he's going to ask the wife, what she thinks is best, and what is she. This is just going to be the natural procedure, I would assume. But what if he doesn't? What if he's like, I know you don't understand it, but here's going to be the rule. Okay, we'll just go with that. Now, I remember reading this one time. Okay, so I'm going to tell myself here. So my wife and I share social media accounts. Facebook, for instance, like anything is just both of us can read it, and we share an account. Okay, so it's Rocky Valerie. We're like, because we're one flesh, right? So she follows a group, Mrs. McMurtry's, what's it called? Gently Led Sisters. Okay, and so anytime somebody posts something on there, I get to read it. Right? Because this is my wife's group, but I get to read it. Right? Long time ago, I remember somebody saying something along the lines of, what do? I some of you ladies might be on there. You might remember this question. Okay, like, what do I do? My husband wants to let my kids watch, I think it was like anime or something like that. And he watches anime with my children. And I don't like that. And so I put my foot down and I say, hey, anime's wicked and all this kind of stuff. And I remember thinking about that, like I so wanted to comment on there. But, you know, this is a woman's group. I'm going to stay out of it. But I wanted to comment on there. And a lot of people, though, got on there and said, like, hey, there are worse things that a man can do than spending time watching something with your children. I mean, why are you freaking out about this? Which was good advice. I mean, like, just calm down. If he wants to allow that, you can go to him and you can talk to him about it, and you can say, like, don't be a nag about it, but you can say, like, hey, I don't think that we should do this. But ultimately, is it really that bad of a deal that he wants to spend time with the kids, and that's the way he does it, is by watching anime, which you don't like? I don't like anime either, by the way. I would never recommend it. But if they're watching it, you know, and the wife is just like, I'm putting my foot down, no, we're not going to do this. Well, that causes a lot of other problems. Because now you've got the wife telling the husband what they're going to do, what they're not going to do, demonstrating before the kids, I know your dad said that, but we're going to do something else. That's not good. That's terrible for a relationship, and for when it comes to raising children especially. Okay, so look at let's see here, 1 Peter chapter 3. And I'll make mention of this again here later on, because this is a great chapter when it comes to our roles as husband and wife, and mother and father. 1 Peter chapter 3. And I can say this, women, I mean, I can say this as a man. I think most men would agree on this. You might feel like, why don't I have a voice? It's not fair. You've got a humongous voice, okay? Even if you do it in the right way, the man wants to know what's going to make you happy and what you think is wise for the children. You have a huge voice. You just got to do it in the right way. You know, because a lot of, if the husband feels like, hey, you're just going against everything that they say, and you're nagging them, and you're putting your foot down, all this kind of stuff, his natural inclination is probably going to be to put his foot down. And now you guys are going to be butting heads, and it's just like, that's not good for your relationship where you're supposed to be one flesh, right? And so what do you do when you both have a disagreement? You got to go with what the husband says. According to the Bible, he's the authority. He's the, and that's just, this is the way that it works. Okay, 1 Peter chapter 3, look at verse 7. No, let me see here. Yeah. Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel. I'll come back to this idea. And being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. Okay, so you're heirs together. You're in this together, all right? But it is saying the husband is to dwell with the wife according to knowledge, giving honor unto her as a weaker vessel. And then it says, let's see here. I think I was supposed to back up a little bit. Chapter 3, verse 1. I got to the end, which we will come back to that here in a minute. Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may, without the word, be won by the conversation of the wives. I used to think that was in regards to salvation. Like if you're in a relationship, woman gets saved, husband's not saved. And he doesn't even want to, he's just not interested in that stuff. Right? That the woman could win the husband over simply by her behavior, by being in subjection to him. He'll be like, all right, maybe I'll listen to her. That's what I used to think it was. But actually, I think this could also involve two people who are saved. But the husband's just not interested in like obeying the word of God. He wants to do his own thing. Well, the wife can actually win him over by the way that she behaves towards him. It's a whole lot more effective than saying like, but the Bible says this, and and just beating him over the head with it. No, you can win by the word. He can be won by the conversation of the wife, and that conversation is not talking about verbal, but it's by action, behavior, by your lifestyle. Okay, while they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear, whose adorning, let it not be the outward adorning of plaiting on the hair, and the wearing of the gold, and putting on of apparel, but here's what's more important. Let be the hidden man of the heart, in that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God a great price. For after this manner in the old times the holy women also, who trusted in God, adorned themselves, being in subjection unto their own husbands. Okay, so establish this. We got to be on the same page when we're raising a family. And according to the Bible, God's got to be in charge. We're doing things His way. But secondly, the husband is the one who's supposed to lead the household. Which means, by the way, spiritually, not just like, well, this is what I want, so this is how we're going to do it in the house. No, you should be working as a team to bring honor to the Lord. Okay, and so the husband should be like, well, I'm going to lead my house spiritually. I'm going to lead my house to follow the Lord. So here's the big problem. We got a lot of guys in this world, Christian men, who are just like, well, I like the idea that I'm supposed to be in charge, but they're not leading their house spiritually. Like, they can lead their house in certain ways, but a lot of times it's the woman who's leading the house spiritually, and that's a terrible thing. She should be able to look towards the man as the one who's going to lead and bring them and say, hey, this is what the Bible says we ought to do. You know, this is how we walk with the Lord. Okay, but ultimately that man is going to have to be the one who is in charge in his own household. Okay, look at Isaiah 3:12. And actually, in situations where that is not the case, which look around in the United States, it's definitely not the case. Isaiah says, in Isaiah we can see that this is actually a curse upon a nation when this isn't the case. And so Isaiah 3:12 says, as for my people, and this is negative. I know that he's talking about his people, but he's criticizing them here. He says, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, they which lead thee cause thee to err, and destroy the way of thy paths. And so in this situation, God's saying, like, look, here's the negative that's happening. Children are oppressing my people. Their children are their oppressors. And their women are leading over them. Okay, this is a negative thing. This is bad. This isn't the way a good society that is God honoring should be. The husband should be leading over the house, and the children should be in subjection, and that's the way that it should go. The mother or the wife's role is in the home, and this isn't popular in our society, but I'm talking about if we're going to work together as a team. If you and your spouse are going to work together as a team, these are rules, guidelines, biblical guidelines that you should be in agreement on. Okay, number one, we're seeking to honor the Lord in what we do. Number two, the husband is in charge. Okay, he makes the decisions. Number three, the wife's place is in the home, raising the children and taking care of the home. Titus chapter 2, verse 3. I know, like I said, these are practical things. They're very familiar to all of us probably, but good to be reminded of these things so that we can hold ourselves to them. Titus chapter 2, starting verse 3. The aged women likewise, that they be in behavior as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God be not blasphemed. Now, I know some people in our society today that are Christians are going to be like, well, this is culture. This is a different time. Like, we're not in that culture anymore, so we don't have to do this. No, these are timeless things that start from the very beginning of the Bible. Titus, Timothy, and Timothy even refers back to that. It says, hey, you know why it's this way? Because in the beginning, and he goes all the way back to the beginning of the Bible. So the Bible's not inconsistent here. It's being consistent throughout the whole thing. And look, God didn't just change all of a sudden one day in the 20th century, just be like, oh, okay, you know what? All those things I said in the Bible about the husband being the head of the house, like that, those are null and void now. No, this is still a principle of what is going to work best in the home. That the wife, her place is to rule. Her role is at home, keeping the home, loving the husband, raising the children, and having a meek and quiet spirit, all those kinds of things, which don't come naturally. They're not always easy, but this is something that we need to work on as a unit when it comes to raising children and many other things. But again, we're talking about partnership and raising children. Now, there might be some minor details where one household and the way this looks might look different than another house. For example, my wife and I decided a long time ago, I would be in charge of the finances. Okay. Some houses, the husband says, I don't think that that's wise. I want you to be in charge of the finances, and so I'm still the head of the household, but I'm delegating this responsibility to you because you can handle the finances better. I have my reasons for doing that, and it surely isn't because I'm better at finances than my wife is. She would do a much better job, okay? But it's just a lot of stress on her, and just like not knowing, I don't know, it just became an authority deal where it was just like, it's going to be much easier if I just take the authority over that and I say, here's what we're going to do, and she doesn't have to worry about it, okay? And I think it's a huge blessing to her to just be like, hey, can we get this? No. Okay. Can we get this? Sure. All right. She doesn't have to stress about it. Anyway, but here's what I'm saying. So that's my family versus maybe someone else's family in here, but both of us are still going under this principle that the man's the head of the house. Okay, and that we're trying to honor God and all these kinds of things. All right, so lots of different areas where this could look differently. I don't have to give you an everything example like this is how I do it at my house, but one thing is for sure, my advice to you is going to be like, well, if a woman comes to me and says like, what do you think I should do about this? I'm be like, well, what does your husband say? Right? That's what the Bible says. That's the way we should do it anyway. In fact, I love that in Titus, when Paul's telling Titus, all right, here's what you need to preach to the aged men and the young men, and tell them that the aged men have to do, that the aged women should be like this and that, and then they should teach the young women. I love that, because you know what, that takes away, as a pastor, my responsibility to have to counsel any woman, any young woman, because I don't know what it's like to be a woman. I don't know how to love a husband. You know what I'm saying? I don't know any of these things. And so like I can just say like, hey, older women, you need to teach the younger women. Husbands, here's what you need to do and how you need to rule in your household and all this kind of stuff. But it's not my job to teach women how to be women. You see what I'm saying? That's the aged women's job, and that's the husband ultimately to decide that this is how my house is going to be run. And so houses are going to look different, but these basic things should be observed in all of our houses, where God's first, the husband's the head of the household, and the wife's role is in the home. Okay. Number two, the next 2 points are going to go by pretty quickly here, but so when it comes to partnership and raising children, number two, your kids should see your unity with your spouse. Okay, if you're a unit raising children together, it should be obvious to your children that, hey, mom and dad are on the same page. They're not like, hey, these are his expectations of the house are, and this is what her expectations of the house are. No, that as far as they're concerned, it should be like, mom and dad, these are their rules. Not this is mom's rule, this is dad's rule. That would be a house divided. Okay, we want partnership. And so your kids should see your unity with your spouse. A negative example of this would be Jacob and Esau, which we're going through in Sunday nights in Iola. We're going through the patriarchs. It's come up here in this series on raising children. Jacob and Esau were treated differently by their parents, to the extent that Rebecca, remember, she even deceives her husband Isaac by helping Jacob to deceive Isaac. When he put the skin on, the hair on him and stuff like that, and wears clothes so that he'll think that it's Esau who's been out in the field and all this kind of stuff. That's a house divided. That's not right. And I think everybody that reads that story knows that shouldn't be the case. She shouldn't be deceiving her husband and helping her son trick her husband. Okay, but although we might not go to that extent, sometimes there are little things that we'll do. I'll give you an example, and I'm not going to say I've never been guilty of this, but you give your child something that, maybe it's getting close to dinner time, and you let them have a little piece of candy or something like that, and you're like, don't tell mom about this, all right? That's a house divided. Don't do that. Don't do that. You need to be on the same page, all right? You don't have to don't tell your mom that. Wives do the same thing. We just won't tell your dad about this. look, we're a unit. Don't teach your kids that you can be one way around your mom and another way around your dad. They need to see your unity. Here's a thing that I've tried to institute in my house. Not always done it perfectly, but I think it's what we need to do. And I've tried to explain to my kids that this is, don't expect me to take your side over your mom's side. Okay, so it's very important. And so, let's say my wife reacts a certain way or responds a certain way to a child when it comes to disciplining them or saying something to them or whatever. Here's what I'm trying to institute. I'm not saying I've been perfect at it, all right, but I'm trying to institute this where I don't correct my wife in front of my children. Or say, now don't be so hard on him. You see what I'm saying? And wives, you shouldn't do that to your husbands either. Now, honey, don't be so hard on him. He didn't mean to do this and that. Now, your children love that. And if they don't get that, they might be like, why aren't you defending me, Mom? Why aren't you defending me, Dad? Well, here's why. Because your mom and dad are a unit. We make mistakes sometimes. And so we might do something wrong in raising our children. But what we don't need is for our wife to make it known to the kids that we were wrong. And vice versa. Your wife is going to do something wrong sometimes, but she doesn't need the kids to see you saying, yeah, your mom's, freaking out again. Your mom's emotional. You know how women are, or something like that. That's not going to be good for your kids. That's not going to be good for you and your wife as a team, raising your children together. And it's going to cause all kinds of problems. So I think it's very important that we work at making sure our kids know that we are a team and that we're in this together. And I'll even say to my children sometimes, look, hey, I want my wife to be happy because I got to live with her forever. Okay? And so she's my teammate. We're always going to be on the same team over you kids. All right? I think that's important. Not that we don't love our kids, obviously. It's just and it's not, I wouldn't say like I love my wife more than my kids. It's just like, hey, you guys are going to make your own decisions someday. You're going to leave the household. We're a team forever and ever. Okay? And so I think that's important for your kids to understand that we are a team. Okay? And the third point is this. Your kids should never be able to, this kind of goes along with that last one, your kids should never be able to divide you or to undermine your partnership. Okay? Because this is what happens in almost every house. The children, they pick up on these differences. And now it's one thing to ask for the child to ask the mom, can I do this? And mom's like, I don't know, go ask your dad. Or even vice versa, like, Dad, can I do this? And like, yeah, I don't know, go ask your mom. And my kids tried to play this, I remember this, like, but you're the head of the house, because they know that I'll probably be more likely to say yes. But you're the one that makes the final authority. I'm like, yeah, but go ask your mom anyway, right? Because as children kind of learn that, okay, this person's more likely to say yes. Or they'll come to you whenever you're sleeping, and say, hey, Dad, can I do this? And then later on, but you said yes. I was half asleep. But your children are smarter than you think they are. They learn how to manipulate, okay? And but we don't want them to ever be able to divide you, your wife and you, or to undermine your partnership. So establish this rule, okay? I think everybody needs to establish this rule in their home. If one parent says no, and the child is caught asking the other parent, after the one parent already said no, goes and asks the other parent, I think there should be some discipline involved there, okay? At the very least, they need to know, like, no, you're not allowed to do that, okay? Because your mom and dad, you're not trying to divide your mom and dad. If one says no, it's no, because this will happen sometimes. Like if they ask mom, can I do such and such? And mom said yes. And then later on, I'm like, whoa, what are you doing? Well, mom said yes. Okay, now I as the husband, the head of the household, I can kind of override that if they don't understand that. But it's not because, I'll let them know that, I'm going to go talk to your mom. We're gonna figure this out or whatever. But you understand what I'm saying? Like, you don't even want them to undermine and to divide you and be like, well, mom said, but, or dad said. Okay, so establish this rule. If one parent says no, the answer is no, unless the husband has a good reason. The husband, by the way, this is biblical. The husband has the right to override a decision that the wife makes, okay? That doesn't mean you're not being a team. It just means like, no, she didn't understand something that I know, or that I want. And so they have the right to establish that. I'm not going to get into like why that is, but that's just goes to the husband being the head of the house, okay? Now, obviously, we should never deliberately go contrary to our spouse as well. So if our spouse says this is the way it's going to be to the child, and then we just like, I already mentioned this earlier, but it's just like, hey, we just won't tell your dad, and then let them do what the dad said not to do. That's a big, big no-no. Okay, you don't want to do that because you're dividing with your spouse and taking the side with your child. And again, we're a unit who's clinging together, who's one flesh, raising children that we're going to send off into the world to be to start their own families, and then we continue to be that unit. Every time that you are dividing from your spouse and cleaving to your child, it's just like, hey, who's in charge? You know what I mean? Is that mother-child relationship going to be stronger than the husband-wife relationship one day? And it's just like, well, your dad, and then just next thing you know, like, it's so easy just to walk away from that relationship. Okay, these things happen all the time in our society today, even in Christian homes. So it's very important as you're established. I would say, like, before someone gets married, they should have these things established and talk about them and understand, like, hey, we're in agreement, right? That our house we're gonna serve the Lord first and foremost. We're in agreement, right? That the husband's the head of the house. Obviously, to be quite honest with you, I felt like at the beginning of my marriage, my wife was telling me, now you're going to be the head of the house, right? And I'm just like, oh, I don't know, am I? Yeah. Yes, ma'am, I guess I'm the head of the house. Like, I felt like that sometimes, and I'm just like, that's not good. Like, if I'm the head of the house, I'm the head of the house, right? But it's something that I had to realize before we actually got married. Wow, that is a lot of responsibility. I am going to have to lead my house. And I'm going to tell you, I grew by leaps and bounds just with that knowledge that, whoa, before I get married, I need to know that I'm going to be the head of the house. I'm going to be leading this house spiritually. It caused me to want to work to be that man that I'm supposed to be. Okay? But if the man's just kind of like this, well, I don't care, you're like, she's smarter than I am, and she can make the decisions, and I'm just along for the ride. You know what I mean? I just like her attention, right? I just want her physical attraction or whatever. No. Before you get married, decide how this is going to work, and how you're going to be a unit, and how we're going to raise our children. That conversation is going to have to be had before you get married, and then it's going to help go a long ways. So now, to not work as a team and to divide and to go the other, to disagree with one another, whatever, this is going to, in the case of the wife, if she goes against the husband, well, she's and the children know this, right? The children are, she's willingly telling the children to do something or make it. Maybe it's even in front of the husband. Like, no, we're not going to do that. After the husband said that we are going to do that, that'd be a huge problem, right? And what it's just now showed the children is that she is not obeying her husband, and that she doesn't expect her children to obey her husband. So you see, like, we just lost a whole lot of ground in establishing authority in the house. And the husband, if he does that to the wife, now because I do have the authority as the head of the house, I could say, no, your mom's out of line, we're not going to do that, okay? But when I do that to the child in front of their mother, or the mother, knows that I'm doing that behind her back or whatever, like, number one, we've lost this trust there that we should have as a unit. Okay, but number two, go back to 1 Peter again. Because all this talk about the husband being the head of the house and the wife honoring the husband and submitting to them and he has authority, all this kind of stuff, it sounds like there's no respect or honor to the wife, but actually that's not true at all. If the husband is leading the house properly, he is honoring the wife. Okay, chapter 3, verse 7, 1 Peter. Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge. What's that mean? understand your wife. Know what's going to upset her. Know what's going to disappoint her, what's going to make her sad. And the opposite. Know what's going to make her happy, and know what's going to give her confidence. And it says this, giving honor unto the wife. What do you mean honor? She's supposed to honor me. Well, that's a terrible way to look at it. Okay, giving honor unto the wife. Look at this, as unto the weaker vessel. Now, that might not sound like a compliment to all the women in this society that teaches women to be so hard and rise up and be their own person and stuff like that. But in reality, I believe, based on just my faith in the Word of God, I believe that every woman in her core really knows, I need a man to protect me. I need a man to take care of me. I need a man to be there and to provide for me emotionally, spiritually, and all these things. I think that every woman knows that in her heart. I need that from a man. And so the reason a man needs to dwell with them according to knowledge is because he is the one who is responsible for taking care of them, for protecting them, providing for them. And so they need to know, all right, this is what is going to make my wife happy. If this, doesn't happen, there's some physiological things, well, get into details, but that a husband needs to know about his wife, that her emotional state is going to be different at certain times, and all of that has to do with the way God made her as the weaker vessel. Goes back to the Garden of Eden. What is one of the things that she's going to have to do? She's going to have to bear children, right? Well, that alone, her physiology and the fact that she has to bear children and all that's involved in that affects her emotionally, it affects her physically, and there's a lot of things that the husband needs to know about that and dwell with her according to knowledge, understand these things about her, and kind of give her confidence that you understand her and that you love her and that you know the things that she's going through. That is going to be a huge help in your relationship. And so just because the husband is the head of the house doesn't mean he's not honoring the wife. He's honoring her as the weaker vessel by taking care of her and knowing her, and dwelling with her according to knowledge. And so if she loses that trust because you're just that's just your mom, and then you're just going with it, telling the children don't worry about your mom, she's just emotional right now or whatever, you go do whatever it is that she told you not to do. What an awful thing to do. You just lost the trust of your wife and really taught your children not to respect her in the way that they should respect her. So you're our partner, you're a team with your spouse, and you guys need to work together and build your relationship, and even while you're raising children. If the child learns that they can divide you, they're going to be trying to manipulate you rather than just having this attitude, okay, you know what, this is what mom and dad said, and so I'm just going to do that, I'm going to obey them. No, they've learned now that there's this, well, I know that's what they said, but can I still get this? No, we want to be consistent, we want to be united in our decisions, And here's what I would say, going back to the rule I said, if the child hears one parent say no, they should never ask the other parent or say, but dad, mom said this, but dad, that's not fair. No, we should never have that conversation. And I would say this, if you think that your spouse made the wrong decision or was too harsh or did something out of line or whatever, that's a conversation that you and your spouse should have, just not in front of the kids, okay? You should remember that, kind of behind closed doors, say, oh, by the way, we did that. I mean, hey, it might lead to a fight. Hopefully not. It might lead to a fight, but you know what? Fights aren't bad. Fights sometimes are part of, fighting for that unity, becoming that one flesh. You have to understand, hey, that wasn't right. This is not the way that we should do this. This is not what we agreed to in raising the children or whatever. Hey, that's not right. Just have that conversation behind closed doors where the kids can't hear it, because as far as they know, you're in agreement. You're on the same page, because you should be anyway. Okay, and so find out, and maybe you go back and say, you know what, whichever spouse it is, I told you this, and I think I was wrong, and so here's what we're going to do instead. they don't have to know that the reason they came to that conclusion is because the mom and dad talked behind closed doors and changed their mind. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if that came out very clearly, but I think that is going to go a long way in building that authority and unity that the parents have over the children. Let me see here. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's hard to even know what our children are thinking or seeing about us when we're raising children as a unit. But that's okay. Like, it's just, you raise your children the best you can. When they're out on their own, they'll raise their family the best they can. You know how it goes. A lot of times they're going to be like, oh, this is why mom and dad did this, because they realize what happens. But at the end of the day, you have made sure that your relationship has grown and been stronger. And I can say this for sure, 100%. My relationship with my wife after raising children is way stronger, and we're way closer. And I would say way more in love, although you might say, like, well, I remember when you guys, before you had children, man, you held hands everywhere you went and looked into each other's eyes, and you always opened her door for her and all this stuff. You loved her so much more than you do now. No. Not even close. I loved her then, for sure. I love her way more now because we've been through this together. We have these experiences. We've raised these children. Like, there's investment and all this stuff, and we've made jokes before. She's just like, oh, I'm just old hat now. Have you ever heard that expression? I'm just old hat. And I remember hearing that thinking, like, what does that mean, old hat? And actually, to me, that's a compliment, right? A hat, after it's old, it fits better. You like it more, right? If you're old hat, that just means that we've grown comfortable with each other, right? It's like that old T-shirt that you just like, man, I love this T-shirt. I know it's just not like what it used to be, but it fits better now. Does that make sense? That's how the relationship in a marriage should go. After raising children, here's the conclusion, right? Here's what success looks like. Here's what we're looking for in our partnership when it comes to raising children. We want to come out of this child rearing thing, hopefully having decent kids who love the Lord and respect and honor their parents. All right, that would be a wonderful thing to have, and just to know, hey, my kids, maybe they didn't turn out exactly the way I pictured, but they're decent people. They love the Lord. They honor their mother and father. I'm happy. We want, at the end of our rearing children, we want to have children that, okay, that's good. I can sit back and relax. Psalm 127 said it. Like, I can sit back in the gate. I'm not ashamed. That would be successful. Now, if you're ashamed of your children after they leave the house, then maybe something went wrong. Okay, but we shouldn't. We want to come out of that having children who are pretty decent and love the Lord, honor us. But number two, we also want to come out of this still wanting to be with our spouse and hang out with our spouse once the kids are gone. We don't want to get to this point where the kids are gone. It's just like, now what are we going to do? We're not raising children anymore. We don't have that common bond, and so like we just grow apart or something like that. No. We should be. And I find myself getting like this sometimes. Like, I love my children. I want them to be around as long as they can and all this. But sometimes, and maybe husbands are more like this than the wives. I don't know. But it's just kind of like, it's kind of going to be nice one day when I can just get back to, I won't go into details, but just get back to living life like I did before we had children, right? And I love children. I love, I want to see what it's going to look like when they lead their families and they go out to the world. Like, I've shot those arrows off, and I'm just waiting to see what fruit's going to come from those. I'm excited. It's enjoyable to watch, but I want to be able to watch that with my wife and say, like, hey, so let's sit back together, right? Brother Collins and that's Valerie's parents, Mrs. Collins, Brother Collins. I don't understand this, okay? Like you'll watch other people and you'll see, I don't understand this, but they'll sit out in their front porch like early in the morning and just open the garage door, and they'll just sit there, and I'm just like, you're looking at your there's nothing pleasant to look at. Like you're just looking at cars and all this kind of stuff. But I do understand it. Like I understand this idea of like, hey, as long as I have my wife with me, it doesn't matter what we're looking at, what we're doing, where we're going. Like I got my wife. Like we're a team. We can talk and we can look back on all the things that happen throughout the course of our life. That's what success looks like. Okay. Unfortunately, like I said, there's too many casualties today when it comes to raising kids. First of all, a lot of people fail at raising their kids because they're so self-focused. They don't even care about raising their children for the Lord. They don't care about being a team with their spouse. It's just like, here's what I want in life, and here's what I'm pursuing, and then the children just go by the wayside. Okay, the marriage falls apart. Don't even think about like this marriage continuing after the children are gone because it's already destroyed. And what a disaster! Like what a terrible thing. I would say like it's almost better if you didn't even have children to begin with, but I don't want to say that because I mean it's important to have children in a marriage, but you know, hey, this should be a wonderful thing that a couple goes through together when it comes to raising children. So anyway, I think that probably ended up being longer than I thought it was going to be, but partnership in raising children, very important that we consider our partner. This is a team. This is a partnership. When we raise our children, we're doing it together. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word and the instructions that you've given us in it. I thank you for all the married couples in this room, in our church, the ones who are just, many of them are just beginning to raise children. Some have raised children for a while now. Some have already had the children grow up and leave the house. And Lord, I pray that you'll just help us make every effort to raise our children in such a way that they'll love you, they'll have a good handle, a good understanding of the Bible and about Christian morals and principles, and they'll want to live good, have good families of their own. But then also, Lord, help us to maintain a wonderful relationship with our spouse, even during the midst of raising our children. Help us be focused with the same focus and have the same ideals and regulations in regards to raising our children. And I pray, Lord, that you just help us to do that, give us success, and have your will and way. And I pray that you'll do that, and we'll be glad to give you the glory for it in the end, and just to praise your name for the many blessings. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. All right, let's get out our